Hello and welcome, I'm Kira Scribner, and today we are here to talk about Victober. I am very, very excited. I'm not drinking tea because I've been up late listening to Taylor Swift, and that is sometimes what you do, and I had tea, and now I have coffee with pumpkin in it. I literally just put raw pumpkin in this and swirled it around because I wanted fall, and I made pancakes yesterday with pumpkin and had extra pumpkin. This is not what we need for a TBR. I am going to set this down and I'm going to talk. So Victober is one of my favorite times each year. I love that we get to gather, we talk about Victorian literature. It is the 10th anniversary. It was started in 2016. So yeah, we have 10 hosts this time. We have 10 challenges. Am I going to do each of these challenges? I'm feeling like very mood reading things. So it is already only the third and I have read 4 books and most of them were not on my TBR. So that is kind of the vibe that we're going with. The books that I've started already, I started with An Old Man's Love by Anthony Trollope because I love this, and he is one of my favorite Victorian authors. I adore him, and I want to branch out more of his books now that I've read his first 2 major series. And this one is about an old man, and he has a woman who he has in as a ward from his best friend who died, and they end up being engaged, but she still has a young man who comes back from the diamond fields, and the story progresses. It did not progress in the way that I assumed and thought it would be, and I was actually kind of disappointed by it. And I don't know, maybe it's like a shorter one and it wasn't what I was expecting. I thought it was going to be a very different setup. So I'll probably talk about that in my wrap up in a month's time. Then I went straight into Jekyll and Hyde. This is a book that I had read back in 2018 and I knew the story. I'm obsessed with the musical. If you ever want a great musical, Jekyll and Hyde, the like beautiful black cover is the best version of it. It has not been performed in many years, but beautiful, beautiful songs. And I really love the story. I think when I read it 7-8 years ago, I was like expecting it to be very different. I was not expecting letters and stuff. It was one of my first Victorian books I ever read. I loved the way that the description was used. There was parts near the end that literally like gave me chills with the way they described it. I thought it was really brilliant. I loved it. It was narrated by, I'm probably going to butcher his name, but Papa Azedu, and fantastic narration. And then I was thinking about great like horror stories, and I also found one narrated by a fantastic man, David Tennant, narrated The War of the Worlds, and I loved this. This is a story about Mars invading Earth, and it is set in 1898, and at the time a lot of people thought it was real, and looking back, like it feels like I can totally understand. It is narrated and it starts like very historically. It is, you know, written, the narrator in the story is an academic and he is writing about it being like in the late 19th century, we did not think about Mars, and he's like talking about it and it is delightful. David Tennant's voice is incredible. And I was very surprised because I read Invisible Man and The Time Machine both way back like, you know, 7 years ago or something, and I just was not that impressed. But then I also read The Island of Dr. Moreau, and I just find that book incredibly racist because of the way that it does stuff. So that book really bothered me, and I was like, I think I'm done with H.G. Wells. So I'm glad that I picked this up on a whim because I love Jekyll and Hyde, and I was like, I need another, you know, book. So yeah, it was brilliant. I loved, it was like very historical, very emotional in parts. It had like the beats of it, and I love the way that it narrated, and it was so interesting to see an apocalyptic story also with like vicars and like English life and like that era. Like at one point they're talking about how the Martians like may invent flight. And I was like, yeah, like then they can, you know, invade the world. And then later on they referenced something and I was like, oh, people don't have airplanes in this era. We're still 5 years away from airplanes. We're talking about like space. And that goes great into the book that I'm currently in the middle of, The First Men on the Moon by H.G. Wells. Not one of his well-known books, but it was the next in the anthology and it is really good. It is about this man who is young, who has failed at everything, and he is trying to write a play. And he is writing a play in a cottage, and this man keeps on coming and humming, and he hates it. So he confronts this man, and then he finds this man is like a scientific guy. And he's like very like aspirational, but this man is a man of business. And he's like, why would I write a play when I can, you know, use this man to get rich? And this man has created events of like floating, so like a balloon, but like taking the gravity away, like early science stuff. But it is very interesting how much of the science stuff also still makes sense or like correlates to it. I'm like, those are things that like you knew in 1898. So this book is from 1901. It is the last year of the Victorian era. It is also one of the years I've never read a book from, so I'm really excited for that. Both of these books I really love the narration in, like the way that the narrator in the story tells a story in like the academic and humorous and stuff. So it's really making me think like, do I need to reread like all of his books that I've disliked so much. I don't think Dr. Morrow could be saved because I just hate the racism in it, but the other books I feel like they might be. The last book that I picked up on the whim is I have like this big anthology on ebook of Victorian verse, and in it is The Goblin Market. So I just read The Goblin Market. I read another book about Italian women and other tragedies, which is poems, and I read each poem twice. And that I think resonated with me so much because I'm not reading the poem trying to figure out the context. I'm doing that and then I'm reading it again for emphasis. Because The Goblin Market is one long poem, I read it like 2 nights ago and I'm going to reread it again before I like mark it because it's only like 30-40 pages. So then that allows me to narrate it, and I wasn't sure what was happening, but now I can read the themes. So I'm very excited. So those are the 4 or 5 books that I have read or am reading. But what books am I going to read for the challenges? So the first one is about friendship, and this one I already have some books that can deal with that, but the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. I read some of his books last year and had read many of them previously. And yeah, I really love the narration by Stephen Fry. It's fantastic, and obviously the central of these stories is Sherlock and John Watson. I think they're great friends. And then I'm not sure about the dynamics in this, but Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell is a book that I've been wanting to read for such a long time. And this is about a girl whose father remarries and she gains a stepmother and a stepsister. I think that friendship or those dynamics might have an influence on it, so I would like to read that. The next prompt is to read a book that is not a novel, and I have already read The Goblin Market, so that could go in, but I also hope to read The Philander by George Bernard Shaw. I really like some of his early plays. I read Mrs. Warren's Profession before, and that was epic, and I just read Pygmalion, so I'm in the mood to read his books. I just bought this copy, and yeah, I think it's been adulterous, and he has a couple other ones from the late Victorian era that I would love to read. And I'm sure I will read a couple other things that are also not novels. The next prompt is to look at a change in status, and many books will have these themes, but I already pinpointed that An Old Man's Love probably would, and it definitely did. So we have the main girl, and she is under her guardian, and that changed her in different social status, and changing status and being aware of how status can affect you is a huge aspect in this book as well as many children's books. And yeah, our main girl, she has that, but also one of her suitors, he is a poor man who wants to profess his love for her, but he is too poor, so he goes to South Africa to try to win his fortune in the diamond fields. So he is a man from the gentry who goes into like this kind of speculating in order to get money, and that is an aspect that is discussed in the novel. And from there we can go straight into the next prompt, which is empire spotting. And this book is, I did not love An Old Man's Love for the way that it dealt with empire, because it includes several uses of the N-word and discussion of like Black people that is just not kind or good. But yes, this is a book that looks at empire and looks at the way that colonial forces impact things, not in a way that is self-aware, but it definitely does deal with it. And, you know, many of these novels do. So that is a prompt that I'll be looking throughout the rest of the reading month. And I think that this is such an apt prompt from Roz. It makes sense a lot that she chose this. The next one I actually struggled with a lot, which is kind of embarrassing because I love underrated women authors, which is the like prompt. But because I wanted to get through some like big ones, and I know I'll be doing other reading that is not Victorian, I like wasn't sure what I was going to read. I was like, what is in the mood that I'm going to read, that I'm going to have access to, and all that. But I chose The Benefactress by Elizabeth von Urnham. And I have spoken about how I love Elizabeth and her German garden so much. I also love The Enchanted April. And this is again a 1901, right at the end of the Victorian era. I love the way that she talks about women and their stories, and this takes place in a woman who I believe she's very poor, and she has the opportunity to get wealth by moving to Germany and becoming like a landlord. But she just wants to be in private and a recluse and all of those things. But then she starts having interactions with a local gentry man as well. And Elizabeth von Urnham is definitely not the most proper of writers, so I'm wondering what is going to happen there. And she also did not have the most proper life. So I'm excited for what is going to happen here. And I love Elizabeth von Urnham, and it's a late Victorian, which I adore. The next prompt has to do with education, and I really hope to eventually read Jude the Obscure. I think like 3 years ago, I sat right here and I read the beginning of Jude the Obscure, and I talked about it being burned by a bishop and how hilarious that was and how I was going to read it. Did I read it? No. The next one, I'm not actually sure that I'm going to read it, but if I do read one, it is going to be a historical setting, and for that one, I'm going to read Barnaby Rudge. This is a book that Katie talked about a lot when she reread all of Dickens' books, and it like has been in my head to read ever since, and I don't know if this month I'm going to read it, but I do want to read it, and it's a historical setting. So the next prompt is about a color wheel, and I got red, which was fantastic, and I was like, I'm not sure which book I'm going to use, and then War of the Worlds is a very red cover. So that is a book that I am definitely going to use for that. The next prompt is to read a piece of fantastical writing from the Victorian era. And I want to read The Princess and the Goblin by George MacDonald. I have really enjoyed some of his books before, The Light Princess, as well as The Day Boy and the Night Girl. And yeah, I really want to read more of his books, and I've had this on my shelf for quite a long time. So this is a book that I definitely hope to read in this time. I don't know, it's about a Princess and Goblin. I'm hoping it's like a Victorian kind of fairy tale. He inspired C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, and yeah, I find him very funny, but also like poignant at times. So the last prompt is about Jane Austen, which I adore so much, but I was like, how am I gonna read something? Like, I don't really want to read her letters or like the autobiography by her nephew. And then I watched Katie's TBR where she was like, yeah, I'm gonna read Trollope because he was influenced by her. And I was like, perfect, already there. I feel like I'm gonna go wild this month. Like, I really didn't want to do a TBR because I was like, I'm pretty sure that I'm not going to stick strictly to it because already I read 4 books that I didn't plan to read, and it's October 3rd. Another book that I know I'm going to be reading in part is Jane Eyre. My real life book club, we divide classic books into like 4 or 5 parts, and then we read a section at a time. And I'm rereading Jane Eyre with them. We are going to the 3rd part, which is fantastic because one of the girls has no idea the plot twist, and I am so ready. I am making her do predictions, and she was predicting many things about criminal organizations and, you know, maybe Grace Poole is his accomplice from an old life of crime. It's fantastic. So yeah, I'm very, very excited to have her realize what the twist in that book is. And yeah, I'm definitely going to be reading some other books as well. I'm not sure exactly. I know that I'm in the midst of A Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen. This is a reread, and I was enjoying plays, so I was enjoying that play. And then also, I'm also in the midst of The House of Spirits by Elizabeth Allende. I have been wanting to read this book for so long. It's a long book. I wanted it on audio. It finally got on audio. And I will say, it is a brutal book in regards to the treatment of women and their autonomy in this book. So yeah, I read her later books, and that is not part of it, but I know that she's probably, and she is very outwardly influenced by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, which is one of the reasons why I don't like The 100 Years in Solitude, is because of that aspect. So I shouldn't be surprised that it's represented here in 1982. But yeah, am I going to read that book? I want to read it. I don't know if that's the thing. It's like such a large book. I'm also in the midst of War and Peace. So I'm in the midst of several very large books that I'm like, I'm probably just going to pause for the month of October and then get back to, but that's why I haven't also been committing to large Victorian books, because I'm like, if I want to read some Henry James, I want to read some other like large books, but I'm like, am I going to read them, or I'm going to read the books that I'm already in the midst of? I wish I could properly segment my reading by month, but I never am able to do that. So I would love to hear what you're most excited to read for Victober. What is your favorite book that you read because of Victober in the past? I feel like that would be fun. Do you think that these are books I will enjoy? Do you think these are books that I would hate? I would love to hear your feedback on it. And yeah, where should my rambling go next? And I will see you soon. Bye.